Does your furry friend take over your bed every night? It's time to reclaim your space while giving them the comfort they deserve with the coldest, cozy dog bed. Don't wait. Check out the link in the video description to buy now on Amazon.
An investigative journalist who was side by side with the family of Muriel McKay, who was famously kidnapped and murdered in 1969 in a case of mistaken identity that baffled the police during last week's failed new dig to find her body, says her family had the means and the determination to keep hunting for her remains. Jane McKay revealed how her BBC Radio 4 intrigue podcast about the kidnapping, Worse Than Murder, of which one episode has been released so far, took a dramatic twist when the Met announced they would launch a search for Muriel's body at the Hertfordshire farm where one of her killers said she was buried. Last week, the journalist joined Muriel's children each day at the suspected crime scene of Stocking Farm, near Stocking, Pelham, after convicted killer Nizamuddin Hussain, who was deported to Trinidad and Tobago after serving 20 years in prison, revealed the spot where he claimed the body of Muriel was buried. It's believed Muriel, 55, was murdered just days after she was taken from her Wimbledon home, after Hussain and his older brother Arthur, who owned Rook's Farm, now Stocking Farm, had kidnapped her for a £1 million ransom, £14 million in today's money, believing her to be the wife of Rupert Murdoch. Muriel was married to Alec McKay, who was Murdoch's deputy at News Limited at the time. Speaking to Mail Online this week, McKay said following the fruitless 8-day dig that the case was like no other story she's ever worked on and the family's hopes of closure had been crushed, but that she was confident that Muriel's children Ian, 82, and Diane, 84, and grandson Mark Dyer, 59, would not rest until her body had been found, more than 5 decades after she was snatched from her home. Ian McKay told UK journalists this week that he didn't want to leave the UK until his mother's remains were located. The Sydney-based 82-year-old had previously been so traumatized by his mother's killing that he had not spoken about the case even to family for decades, says McKay, before he finally agreed to be interviewed by her after she arranged a meeting with him while she was working in Australia. He has since spoken in depth to her about his mother's murder for the Radio 4 podcast. Mrs. McKay's family have been calling for the police to allow convicted killer Nizamuddin to be brought to the excavation site to show detectives where he buried her body in 1970. They believe her body cannot be found without him physically in the UK. They slammed the search as nonsense and pointless without Hussain being there, calling it the blind leading the blind. Last week's search was the 5th of the farm, including 3 in 1970, and the Metropolitan Police, who carried out the operation with Hertfordshire Constabulary, warned before it began that it would be the last attempt to find Mrs. McKay. McKay said 82-year-old Ian, who lives in the Southern Highlands in New South Wales, with 3 of his 4 children also residing in Australia, was, along with his sister and nephew, determined to look at new avenues, potentially privately funding a new search. The journalist said, "Can he really put his life on hold for this? Because the Metropolitan Police have said unless there's fresh evidence, and there won't be, that's it." She added that correspondence with the family, who have significant wealth, in recent days had left her in no doubt that they were as committed as ever to gaining closure for their mother and late father. They have the means and the determination, particularly with Muriel's grandson Mark Dyer driving things. "I've no doubt they'll keep trying to find Muriel." McKay co-presents Worse Than Murder with author Simon Farquhar, who has worked on the story for years, piecing together every last scrap of evidence for his 2022 book A Desperate Business, The Murder of Muriel McKay. The first episode of Worse Than Murder, which was released on July 15, examines the couple's wealthy background and Alec's successful media career before recounting how Mr. McKay returned to his Wimbledon home to find his house in disarray and his wife missing on December 29, 1969. The 30-minute episode details how Mr. McKay called the police and then immediately enlisted the help of his media contacts, including then-editor of The Sun, Larry Lamb, to try and secure his wife's safe return to their upmarket family home. While Lamb and Th.